Gaza has been almost completely destroyed. With more than 67,000 Palestinians killed so far, Israel, a nation that was embroiled in political instability even before the war began, has been governed by Netanyahu throughout the war. But global and domestic perception may have shifted. Now here's a lowdown. From 2018 till 2022, a total of 5 parliamentary elections had been held in the state of Israel, all of which failed to deliver a clear verdict. But after a wave of political instability and also losing the prime ministerial job to Naftali Bennett in 2021, Netanyahu came back to power again in 2022. Now, Netanyahu's comeback to the prime ministerial job did not calm the public anger. There were widespread protests that erupted in 2023 after Netanyahu tried to push forward the judicial reforms in the country. The series of protests continued until October, when Hamas managed to breach the Israeli high-tech walls and surveillance to carry out what is being dubbed as one of the biggest attacks on the state of Israel, and also managed to take more than 250 hostages. Netanyahu announced that the state of Israel was officially at war with Hamas, and with that announcement began a military offensive on the Gaza Strip, in which more than 67,000 Palestinians have been killed in the last 2 years of war, and almost more than 150,000 Palestinians have suffered some grievous injuries. And the Israeli war is still ongoing. In the 2 years so far, Netanyahu's stated goal of trying to get back the hostages and also to eliminate Hamas are yet to be achieved. Now, during this time, Netanyahu has also become Israel's first prime minister to stand in a criminal trial, facing a series of charges on corruption, ranging from fraud, bribery, breach of trust in 3 separate cases. Netanyahu was also pushed to delay the trial in the name of war, but was eventually summoned to testify in the court. Now, the officials who were at the helm of major government agencies during the 7th of October attack are now out of their jobs. This includes the RDF chief Herzi Halevi, the defense minister Yoav Gallant, and the Shin Bet chief Ron Bar. But Netanyahu has managed to retain his job. In July this year, Netanyahu in fact came close to losing power when the ultra-Orthodox Alliance Party quit Netanyahu's cabinet over the military's conscription rules for the ultra-Orthodox Jews. But despite withdrawal, the party managed to keep Netanyahu's government afloat. Now, according to the latest poll conducted by an Israeli institute, about 64% of the Israelis think that Netanyahu should resign over the 7th of October attack. And of this number, 45% of the Israelis feel that the Israeli Prime Minister should resign immediately, while about 19% say that he should resign after the war is over. Now, with respect to the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip, about 66% of the Israelis say that time has now come for Israel to end it. On the other hand, about 27% of the Israelis say that the time is not yet come for the war to be over, while 7% of the Israelis say that they are unsure. The percentage of Israelis who want the war to end has gone up by 13% from last year. The biggest reason behind the sentiment to end the Gaza war is because the hostages that continue to remain in Hamas's custody. Now, little over 1 year is left for the next elections in the state of Israel, and Netanyahu's fate will of course be in the hands of the Israeli voters again on the 27th of October in the year 2026, when the country heads to polls after a war that has left Gaza devastated. The Israelis are increasingly isolated on the global stage, and a growing number of accusations against Netanyahu for dragging on a war to continue to remain in power.
ولكل الدول المجاورة.
Let's now shift our attention to the United States, where the Trump administration has declared the U.S. cities to be war zones. And now the Trump administration is threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act. Now, the American president is openly talking about using emergency powers under the Insurrection Act after a federal judge in Oregon temporarily halted the National Guard deployment in Portland, while another judge in Illinois allowed a similar move to proceed for now in Chicago.
We have an Insurrection Act for a reason. If I had to enact it, I'd do that. If people were being killed and courts were holding us up, or governors or mayors were holding us up, sure, I'd do that. I mean, I want to make sure that people aren't killed. We have to make sure that our cities are safe.
All right, now, according to a presidential memo, Donald Trump has called into service nearly about 300 members of the Illinois National Guard to protect ICE and other federal personnel. Now, the Illinois officials had filed a suit seeking to block the deployment in Chicago, but the judge, April Perry, an appointee of Joe Biden, declined to issue an immediate temporary restraining order. She is scheduled for a full hearing on the matter later and has asked the government to inform the court to provide more information. Now, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has defended the plan to send troops to Chicago, claiming that the third largest American city is a war zone. And the debate has mushroomed after it became known that the Republican-led Texas was planning to send about 200 of its federalized National Guard troops to Illinois, a move that has infuriated Democrat Governor J.B. Pritzker.
I have called upon Governor Abbott to immediately withdraw his support for this decision and refuse to allow Texas National Guard members to be used in this way. Let me be clear. Donald Trump is using our service members as political props and as pawns in his illegal effort to militarize our nation's cities.
Now, Trump's comments about the centuries-old Insurrection Act came just minutes after Pritzker warned that Donald Trump was creating a premeditated escalation of violence as a pretext to invoke the emergency powers.
The Trump administration is following a playbook: cause chaos, create fear and confusion, make it seem like peaceful protesters are a mob by firing gas pellets and tear gas canisters at them. Why? To create the pretext for invoking the Insurrection Act so that he can send military troops to our city.
Now, Trump has similarly called Portland to be war-ravaged. However, a district judge has issued a temporary block on the troop deployment in Oregon, saying that the president's determination was simply untethered to the facts. The White House has said that it will appeal the court's decision on Portland, and the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt has said that the administration is very confident in the president's legal authority to do this. All right, now to give us more updates in terms of what is happening at this moment in the United States, we're joined by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us live from New York. Susan, it's pretty bizarre what's unfolding there. Donald Trump has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act. Members of the Trump administration have described some American cities to be war zones. Now, why does Trump want to send the National Guard to some of these American cities that are governed by Democrat governors? What's actually happening there? Tell us the dynamic behind this power play here.
Yeah, it's more than a power play, Mohammed. Really, when you look at these protests in Portland, notably by Antifa members, they're anything but peaceful. And the residents are weary about even going downtown Portland because there's almost somewhat of a, internal war happening between these protesters. Not only ICE agents who are trying to do their job, but also the residents there who don't want to be caught up in this crossfire. And this has been going on for months, if not years, in Portland. Chicago is a whole different story. Chicago is, unfortunately, notably its south side, one of the most violent cities here in the United States. And President Trump, although he has not invoked the Insurrection Act, he's suggesting that if these leaders of these states try to stand in his way, then he can invoke that Insurrection Act. He can't do it with a strike of a pen. He first needs to declare a proclamation calling on insurgents if you like to call them, to step aside peacefully. If they don't, then he can ultimately call in the National Guard or federal forces to assist local law enforcement there. And that's the difference between a martial law. The martial law doesn't work hand in hand with local law enforcement. But nonetheless, these leaders say we can handle our own situation. And then there's the question of whether or not these protesters are ultimately insurgents. So this is where the power play lies, but it's also really ultimately about safety and security in these cities. Can these local law enforcements really provide security and safety for the residents of those cities? And I think that's where the debate happens. Of course, this will all get settled in court. It's not the end of it. We're going to hear about it. The court in Chicago didn't stop and block these troops from coming.
Right.
So they're on their way from Texas to Chicago, and they're expected to arrive before Thursday. So let's see what happens there.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with all those updates then. Now, the American government shutdown has entered into its second week, and the impact is being felt across the nation. On Monday evening, a busy California airport had no air traffic controllers. And Governor Gavin Newsom has said that the Hollywood Burbank Airport, which connects Los Angeles to the rest of the country, is said to be without qualified staff in control tower for nearly about 6 hours. Now, Gavin Newsom has blamed the president for the shutdown. The Federal Aviation Authority has said that departures to the airport were delayed by around 2.5 hours. But a spokesperson for the airport has said that the operations are continuing. While most federal workers have been placed on enforced leave during the shutdown, those doing essential jobs like air traffic controllers are expected to continue to work, but without pay. Now, the development has come as the nationwide government shutdown has now entered into its second week. Two rival bills attempted to end the U.S. government shutdown failed during the evening voting of the Senate. A Republican bill gathered 52 affirmative votes and 42 nays. Previously, the Democrat-led bill had 45 affirmative votes and 50 negatives. Now, 3/5 of the Senate is needed to approve the motions to put forth. Now, the Democrats are demanding for an agreement on extending the expiring Obamacare healthcare subsidies and also reversing the cuts to healthcare programs that have been passed as part of Trump's signature One Big Beautiful Bill. Now, the Republicans are digging in their heels, with the House Speaker Mike Johnson telling his members not even to report to the Congress unless the Democrats cave in, insisting any debate about health care to be held after reopening the government. Now, President Trump on Monday opened what may be called a little window for discussion, saying that he would be happy to negotiate a deal on health program with the Democrats. But he's demanded that the federal government first should be reopened. But Democrat leaders in Congress have denied that there are any negotiations with Trump. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said that the White House has gone radio silent since a meeting in the Oval Office last week. He's also taken a swipe at the House Speaker Mike Johnson for keeping his fellow Republican House members on a break from the Congress this week.
And the interesting thing to me is, why are House Republicans still on vacation? They've actually been on vacation for the last few weeks, and Mike Johnson once again has canceled votes. Why are they so afraid of being here at the Capitol and doing their job?
With members of the Congress at home and no formal talks taking place in either chamber, a CBS News poll released on Sunday shows the public blaming the Republicans by a very narrow margin for the gridlock. All right, let's now give you some breaking news that's in fact just come in from Nepal. Now, the country's police has agreed to receive complaints against the deposed Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli along with the former Home Minister Ramesh Lehkak. Now, the case is related to the deaths of the protesters during the Gen Z-led demonstrations that ousted the former government in Nepal. When KP Sharma Oli was at the helm of affairs, about 19 protesters were killed in police firing on the 8th of September. In total, 76 people were killed during the two-day protests that engulfed the Himalayan nation. All right, now to give us more updates on this, we're joined on this broadcast by my colleague Saloni Murarka, who's joining us from Kathmandu over the phone line. Saloni, brings up to speed with what does it mean that cases will now be registered against the former Prime Minister who's no longer in charge?
A group of families that is complained. The complaint was lodged by the families of the victims of the sexist death, alleging that the two leaders responsible for the crimes against humanity and also the state census during the crackdown, as we know, on the demonstrations on September.
Right, there seems to be an issue with the audio, with the line with my colleague Saloni Murarka. We'll try to reconnect with her in just a bit. But this, of course, the big breaking development that has come in from Nepal, where the country's police has now agreed to receive complaints against the deposed Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, along with the then Home Minister Ramesh Lehkak. And the case, of course, is related to the deaths of the protesters during the Gen Z-led demonstration that ousted the government. Now, when KP Sharma Oli was at the helm of affairs, 19 protesters, remember, were killed during the police firing on the 8th of September. In total, 76 people were killed in the two-day unrest that engulfed the Himalayan nation. All right, let's now shift our attention to what is happening in France, where the French President Emmanuel Macron's back is clearly against the wall. Now, the clouds of a fresh election are looming large. The newly appointed Prime Minister Sébastien Locarno, believe it or not, has also tendered his resignation, making him the fifth head of government to do so in the last 2 years. And Locarno spent a grand total of 27 days in office as the Prime Minister. He's now decided to step down from his position just hours after the appointment of cabinet. But before Locarno leaves the office, Macron has now urged him to stay on as the Prime Minister for 48 hours more. The French president has asked Locarno to build a stability plan, and this would involve negotiations with a very hostile opposition. But the hope is to break the impasse, which is pretty thin. The Socialist Party is asking Macron to appoint their Prime Minister. The far-right National Rally is in fact calling for the dissolution of the National Assembly, and Macron's own party leaders are saying that they simply no longer understand his own decisions.
I no longer understand the President of the Republic's decisions. First came the dissolution, and since then there have been decisions that suggest a determination to cling on to power.
And so, before you and the French people tonight, I am speaking in favor of a change of course and a left-wing government coming to power. We have already had 3 right-wing prime ministers. Since yesterday, we have been attending Boulevard Theatre. Ministers are coming back in through the window and going out through the door.
Once again, I call on the President of the Republic to address the suffering in the country. He must come out of the isolation he has imposed upon himself for several months and dissolve the National Assembly. The joke has gone on for long enough now, and it is time to face the French people.
The sticking point in the budget cuts is bringing down one government after another. The country's debt has risen to over 113% of the GDP, and the deficit has nearly doubled the European Union's 3% limit. The earlier plan was to cut down the spending, and that has failed to court political storm from the far right as well as from the far left parties. The Macron is 3 years into his second term, and since his re-election, he's seen the departure of a total of 5 prime ministers. The longest serving prime minister was Elizabeth Borne. She remained the prime minister for 1.5 years. Macron then appointed Gabriel Attal, France's youngest and first openly gay prime minister. He passed the baton to Michel Barnier in September 2024. Just 3 months later, Barnier was removed through a no-confidence vote. And next, it was Francois Bayrou who took charge of the office, but he met with the same fate in another no-confidence vote that was brought against him after 9 months. Sébastien Locarno was the next in line, and France's prime ministerial musical chair continues. But the question, of course, remains, can Locarno salvage the French government in 48 hours? If not, Macron will be left with 3 very dire choices. Name a new prime minister again, dissolve the parliament and then call for fresh elections, or probably resign himself. Now, there is a major political battle that is ongoing in the European Parliament, where the EU chief Ursula von der Leyen is facing yet another confidence test. And this comes less than 3 months after surviving a similar challenge. The EU chief is facing two motions challenging her position, one from the far left and another from the far right. Now, Ursula von der Leyen has urged for unity and has called the no-confidence motion against the interest of the European bloc.
The point I'm making is that we need to focus on what really matters, which is to deliver for Europeans. Because, honourable members, the truth is that our adversaries are not only ready to exploit any divisions, they are actively inciting those divisions in the first place.
The motions are less likely to be taken down, Ursula von der Leyen, but the frustration is mounting against her in the European Parliament. Grievances include accusations of a lack of transparency and trade deal with US President Donald Trump in July that is denounced by many EU lawmakers as biased towards Washington. Now, Ursula von der Leyen, on the other hand, has defended her tariff deal with Trump and is calling it the best that the EU can get. A vote on Thursday will reveal the state of the so-called pro-European coalition between Ursula von der Leyen's conservative EPP grouping that also has the centrists and the socialists, and a successful vote of no confidence would be a historical first. Now, Madagascar is on the boil. To calm weeks-long anti-government protests, the country's president has now turned to the military. In a late-night address, the president, Andreev Rajoelina, announced that he is appointing Divisional General as the new Prime Minister. He said that the general will serve the people, has promised clean governance, integrity and action.
With wisdom, I have decided to appoint Rufin Fortunat Dimbisoa Zafisambo, Divisional General, as Prime Minister of the government.
But that promise has done very little to calm the people in the streets. The Gen Z movement that has spearheaded the protests online has rejected the appointment and has issued a 48-hour ultimatum for the president to step down. The days of youth-led protests over the power cuts and the government mismanagement have spiraled into a widespread anger against the government. The streets of Antananarivo have turned into a flashpoint of anger and hope. Now, for nearly 2 weeks, thousands of young protesters have marched through the capital. They are facing tear gas and baton charges. And according to the United Nations, at least about 22 people have been killed and over 100 others have suffered injuries. Now, the Argentine President Javier Milei led an event in Buenos Aires Stadium, presenting himself as a rock star. Now, Javier Milei, in fact, launched his book, The Construction of the Miracle. This a few weeks before the crucial midterm legislative elections. Take a look at these images. And with that, wrap on this edition of Race to Power. Thanks for watching.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening, as we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at yowon.com.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide, because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION, World is One.
Where darkness hides behind every corner. Where the truth is stranger than fiction. A show that dives deep into the stories which shock and mystify. Unsolved murders. Psychopaths who defy explanation. International war crimes. And millions swindled in financial fraud. The victims, the accused, and the sinister plot. Prime Crime is your front row seat to darkness.
Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. To some, it's an extreme ideology. To others, it's the very soul of India. To some, it's rebellion. To others, it's a principle of nation building. Coming soon to challenge perceptions in RSS centenary year, Kesariya at 100.
Hello, welcome to WION Fine Print. We are glad you're watching WION One Live One. My name is Eric Njoka. The headlines at this hour. Prime Minister Narendra Modi dials Russian President Vladimir Putin, congratulates him on the 73rd birthday. The two reaffirmed their commitment to further deepen India-Russia special and privileged strategic partnership. Putin is to visit India on the 5th and 6th of December. The Kremlin warns US supplying Ukraine with potentially nuclear-capable Tomahawk missiles will be a serious escalation, claims, however, that the move would not change the situation on the front lines. Taliban acting Foreign Minister Amir Muttaqi welcomes Russia's recognition of his government, with the Kremlin calling for removal of sanctions against the group. Muttaqi holds talks with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov at the 7th Moscow format consultations in Russia. An FIR filed against deposed Nepal Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli and then Home Minister by the youth-led Gen Z group which organized protests last month. Police officials say a probe commission against the two leaders has already been set up. Elections to Tibetan Parliament in exile to be held in two phases on the 1st of February and on the 26th of April next year, says Tibetan Election Commission in India's Dharamshala. Tibetans living in exile across the world can vote. Briton John Clerk, Frenchman Michael H. Devereux, and American John M. Martinis win Physics Nobel Prize. The trio was awarded for the discovery of macroscopic quantum mechanical tunneling and energy quantization in an electric circuit. Emergency services in Madrid scrambled to find 4 people missing after an under-construction building collapsed. 10 people are reported injured.